drug charges right in front of my grandmother. They handcuffed me, they walked me in front of all my neighbors. The craziest part about that day for me, I didn't even really care. I was so broken and lost at that point. I had pretty much accepted my fate as prison and eventually death. But this was 3 weeks before my older brother's wedding. It was supposed to be a really happy time for my family. Here I am again, just messing up for everyone. This is why we say addiction is a family disease, because it impacts a lot more than just the person who's using drugs or alcohol. I was bailed out of jail to make it to my brother's wedding on September 28, 2012. And on September 29, 2012, around 3 in the morning, I took my last drink and my last drug. September 30th, 2012 was my sobriety date. Now, the time that I think it was going to be my last, I really wasn't sure, but I wasn't left many options. I had to be back in a treatment program by Monday morning, otherwise I was being remanded to jail. So I walked back to this treatment program. I had been to the same one 9 months earlier, my old counselor standing at the front door waiting for my arrival. I walk up and I see him, and I put my head down in shame. He tells me to pick my head up, and he looks at me and he says, "Are you ready?" And for the first time in my life, I just stopped fighting. I surrendered, and I said to him, "Please just tell me what to do, because clearly I have no idea." So he sent me to a year-long treatment program with 3 different phases. Pretty much what that means, as you progress through the phases, you get more freedom. And it wasn't until around month 5 or 6 of being sober, I was going about my day, I realized that when I woke up that morning, drugs wasn't the first thing on my mind. Every single morning I woke up with the same thought process. Do I have drugs? Okay. If not, how am I going to get them? Around month 5 or 6, I didn't have that thought. I ate lunch, met with my case manager, was a counselor watching over me, and I told him, and he smiled back at me. And he said, "This is when recovery is really going to start working for you. You give me your best shot." Something changed in me that day. I made a choice. I made a choice to give myself a real second chance at life, knowing how hard this was going to be for me. But because I prepared myself how hard it was going to be, I was willing to ask for help, and I had that support there with me. It made it a little bit easier. I wanted to make big change in my life, but they said, slow down, start with some small things. Let's get down to some healthy habits and healthy routines. Try this. Lay out your clothes the night before, set an alarm, get up on time, make your bed, brush your teeth, clean your room, organize your stuff, go work out, come back, take a shower, write down 3 things you're grateful for, meditate or pray for a few minutes, and then go start your day. I still do a lot of it to this day. Got some healthy routines now you got to build a life for yourself. They let me volunteer in the community a little bit and enroll in just 2 classes at a college. I had failed almost every single college class I had taken previously. Now I got A's in both of these classes. Why? It was the first time I went to a college class sober. Then in the final phase of this program, they made me what's called a resident house manager, which just meant I was still a resident in the program, but trusted enough to watch over some of these younger guys. And all of these good things slowly started coming into my life, and it's because I was living a sober lifestyle. And that's not about just not using drugs and alcohol. It's about being a good person. It's about doing the next right thing. It's about helping other people. It's about mindfully building a life that's worth defending. I had to create a life that was worth staying sober for. Works for me in the recovery side, which worked for all of you on the prevention side of this. Build a life that's worth protecting. Be mindful of how hard you've worked to get to where you are today, the adversity you've had to overcome, and have a goal-oriented mindset on where you want to go from here. And don't let drugs and alcohol get in the way of that. Because I completely turned my life around, I was able to avoid going to prison, and I was actually given a full-time job working at the treatment program I had just gone through myself. I remember the day I found this out. I met with the program director in his office. We talked for a while. We joked around before I walked out. The program director gave me a big hug, and he said to me, "You might have one more high left in you, but I seriously doubt you have more recovery. Take this gift that you've been given and go do something extraordinary. Go use it to help a lot of people." I walked out of his office that day, and I haven't looked back ever since. I live my life in a completely different way today. I have a lot of people to thank for it, people who spoke up when things need to be said, and that applies here too. At almost every single school I speak at, I have students who come snitch is someone who gets in trouble and tries to get other people in trouble to save themselves. But if you speak up because you're genuinely concerned about someone and your motive is to help them, that just makes you a good person. It makes you a good friend. There's a big difference between the two. All you have to do is check your motive, check your intentions, ask yourself, why am I speaking up? Am I speaking up to try and help this person? Not only are you doing the right thing, you could potentially save a life. There are great opportunities out there for all of you. I promise this. There's so many ways you can live without the use of drugs and alcohol. I do it every single day. I found a way to take all my pain, all my struggle, and I figured out what I really want to do with my life. I found what my passion is, and it's doing this right here. Some studies say that one of America's #1 fears more than anything else is public speaking. I was missing out on great opportunities every single day out of fear. Fear of rejection, fear of failure. You gotta be able to work through those fears, support each other, most of all, believe in yourselves. There's something you really want to do, go out there and do it. Just before I celebrated Tears of Recovery, I left my job in that treatment program to go back to college. Majoring in criminal justice with the goal of going to law school one day, knowing how hard that would be for me because of my criminal history. I gave everything I had. I went to John Jay College in Criminal Justice. My final semester there, I started applying to law school, studying for my law school admissions test, but I knew I needed more, so that's when I decided to start this, Speak Sobriety. I wanted to share my story, especially with young people like yourselves, in a way that was never presented to me when I was in middle school or high school, not knowing even one school or coalition ever agreed to bring me in as a speaker. This is my 9th school year doing this officially. I've had the opportunity to speak for over 900 different schools and coalitions all across the country. I graduated from Brooklyn Law School, took the bar exam, passed. I'm a defense attorney in New York. I published a book called The Journey to Recovery. I got married. I have my family back in my life. I have true friends today. Friends who support me in what I do. I support them what they do. I have a 2-year-old daughter at home and a 1-year-old daughter at home. I just started working for a treatment program called Guardian Recovery, try and help people get on this road to recovery. And I have all these amazing things in my life today because I live this sober lifestyle, centered around wellness, making healthy choices, helping others, and most of all, I was given and then earned a second chance to go out there and take those healthy risks, just not those risks that can cost you your life. I want to save some time for a few questions. You've all been a very respectful audience. Thank you for being here today, and thank you for letting me share my story. Thank you. So I want to open it up for questions. Before I do, there's just one thing I have to say. This has nothing to do with you as an audience. You guys were great. So I do understand that this is a sensitive topic. It really is a sensitive topic for every school that I go to. So if someone has the courage to raise their hand and ask a question, all I ask is show them the respect they deserve. You do not know how this story, how this presentation affected the person who's sitting next to you. There are people in here right now who are impacted by this. There are people in here right now whose family members are impacted by this. So all I ask for is respect. You show that to me, so I have no concerns, but I just say it anyways. So I'll open up to you for questions. What will likely happen is I'll open it up to you. I'll stand up here kind of awkwardly for like 45 to 60 seconds, waiting for the first person to get the courage to raise their hand and ask a question. Oh, not here. Go ahead.
What is the hardest drug you ever done?
The hardest one I ever tried?
Yes.
I would say heroin for me. The worst one I've ever seen was crystal meth. It's less prevalent on the East Coast. It's definitely here, but on the West Coast, I had tried the geographical solution at one point, and I moved to California and found trouble out there, but it was definitely more prevalent on the West Coast for sure.
How did you just end up yeah, let me take heroin? How did I get to that point?
Say that again?
How did you end up yeah, I was going to take heroin?
How did I end up there? So you heard the story, right? So it's a fatal, focus on the word, progressive illness.
Yeah.
Right? So I went to that first party. I used alcohol and nicotine. I walked back to a friend's house, and nothing bad happened that night at all. Right? Then a few months later, drinking alcohol, smoking marijuana, went back to the same friend's house. Nothing bad happened that night either. A few more times, freshman year, school year ends. Nothing to show that this is a problem for me. Right? Then, summer going to my sophomore year, I'm using it more. And then now I'm hanging out with people who are doing it more. And then one of my friends started having me sell it for him. So now I'm smoking marijuana like every day, right? And I would draw these lines for myself. Like I would say, all right, I'll only smoke marijuana and drink every once in a while on the weekends. Then it was, all right, I'll do it every weekend, but never during the week. Then it was, all right, I'll do it sometimes during the week. And then it was, I'll do it every day. But I'll never try a pill. I'll never try anything other than marijuana and alcohol. And then what happens is our bodies build a tolerance to the drug. It stops working. You don't get the same relief that you got before. Plus, you just added more problems onto it, and then now somebody offers me a pill. And whereas before, I would have said absolutely not, now my brain chemistry has changed. Now what used to be unacceptable, an unacceptable risk, now it's an acceptable risk. And so I try that painkiller one time. Same thing. All right, I'll only do it once. All right, I'll only do it on special occasions. I'll only do it on the weekends. And then you keep going and you get to the same point. Opioid painkillers, very expensive, very hard to get. What's a cheaper alternative? Here's the answer to your question. Heroin. And that's how it happened, right? And you don't just like wake up one day and you're like, yeah, let me just try heroin today. Like, it doesn't happen that way. Yeah, it doesn't really happen that way. So it's like, it's progressive. Now, some people, you'll be surprised, some people's stories get there quick. Some people, it can take years before you actually get there. And with fentanyl today, usually that story stops with death, unfortunately. I don't know how else to say it. I'm not a scared straight type of speaker. I don't think that I know fear is not an effective way of educating people. It's just, the drug supply is just that dangerous today. And that's how it happens. But nobody goes into it with the intention of becoming addicted or that happening to them. And the problem with this is that everyone reacts differently. Like I have that one friend who tried an opioid painkiller with me. He threw up, and he was like, this is horrible. And he never did it again. Right? My second friend who took it liked it, but it wasn't 5-6 years later before he actually got addicted. And me, I'm like, go, go, go. Because everyone's brains are different. Everyone's mental health is different. And that's what makes this stuff very complicated. But the only thing I know for sure, this is one of the first things I said this morning, you cannot become addicted to a substance you've never taken. It simply just can't happen, right? People all the time who come up to me who grow up in this, right? Generational addiction. They're like, I'm so scared that I'm going to fall into it. And I understand the fear. And I ask, have you ever tried a substance before? They're like, no. Okay. It can't happen. I understand that's easier said than done to withstand that pressure. But what I'm really saying, like very just logically, is it can't happen. You can't become addicted. You can't overdose on something you don't take. You have to make the choice. And once you make the choice to pick it up in the first place, that's when you give up the power of choice. Because then drugs and alcohol will start making the choices for you. But the first use, you do have some choice there. You first and you second. Go ahead. Thank you. So let me ask you a question. Who here has, in the last year or two, seen documentaries on wilderness programs? Raise your hand. You've seen them. Yeah, good amount of you. Okay. So this question, your statement question, has been coming up more often in the last, especially this school year, been coming up because people have been seeing documentaries, and you've also probably seen some stuff on social media too of people coming out and sharing their stories and sharing their experiences. So the reason why my parents sent me to a wilderness program is because most treatment centers do not take people against their will. You must voluntarily walk in. Like if I have trouble with mental health and addiction and I walk into a treatment center and let's just say I'm able to get admitted there, if at any point I want to leave, they'll try and convince you not to leave, but they're not going to stop you. You can go walk out. The exception is wilderness programs and minors. If their parents sign consent, then they can come take you against your will. And the problem is it's a very, very vulnerable population and a very easy way to take advantage of people. Let's just say you're a parent and you have a kid who's struggling with addiction and behaviors, and then they create some website that says, we can solve all your problems. And any parent is going to jump on that. And they have really good salespeople, and they convince you that this is the only solution for your problem, and then they go, and some of them were unethical, and some of them were criminal. I mean, just absolutely awful. The one I went to, I experienced verbal abuse. I didn't experience any other type of abuse, but I did experience verbal abuse there. For the first week, I wasn't allowed to talk to anyone. I was put by a tree, and basically I had to complete all these written assignments before I was allowed to talk to anyone. They would just bring me my food, and I had to complete these assignments. I wasn't allowed to talk to anybody. So I don't recommend wilderness programs for anyone, but I understand the idea. Like if you have a very defiant and troubled kid and they're refusing treatment, what do you do? So you were definitely right. So part of the reason why I joined this treatment center called Guardian is because I want to change that. I actually spoke at a school down in Florida, and the owner's kids went to the school that I went to, that I spoke at, and that's how I got connected with them. And I've been trying to, what my job there is like, if somebody's struggling, is to get them resources. It may not even be with our treatment center, it might be somebody else who's struggling. So that's really what my job, my title is Director of Community Outreach. So just trying to point people in the right direction, because there are great treatment centers out there, and there are some really awful ones too. And unless you actually work in this field, you don't know the difference between the two. Correct, they get taken. The overwhelming majority would not. They get taken advantage of. Go ahead. How did the therapy I received help me overcome, become sober? It's a big part of my early journey, is learning about how I defined myself as a failure at 16 years old. Because I started making these choices, and because of these choices, consequences followed, and because these consequences were following, people were labeling me, people started walking away from me, and you start to hear these bad things about you, and you believe it, and you act on it, and you become it. And so I had convinced myself by 16 I was a failure, and I really needed to work through that. And that was a big part of what I worked through in therapy. Healthy coping skills, learning how to deal with those uncomfortable feelings. That's why I talked about that healthy habits and healthy routines, how important all that stuff is, and also being willing to ask for help when I needed it. I was one of those guys who always felt like I had to figure it out on my own, and I needed to be willing to ask for help. So those were some of the things that I learned when I was going through the counseling, for sure. Go ahead. Yeah, so here's how I would explain addiction. I explain it as a fatal progressive illness, right? And the reason why we call it an illness is because it is a brain disease. And you have created pathways in your brain that are so reliant on this substance that without it, you feel like you can't function. It's like water and food and air and oxygen. That's what it feels like when you're stuck in that addiction. It's like you feel like there's no way out. And so when people say, oh, it's just, you're just weak, just stop. In the simplest terms, people think drugs are bad. If you stop using, you feel good. It doesn't work that way. Drugs are bad. You stop using, you feel worse before you get to better. And what if you have an underlying mental health condition that you haven't learned how to cope with? Like if you feel depressed, or if you feel like this clinical anxiety all the time, and you take a substance and it goes away for a short period of time, can you blame the person for wanting to feel that way again? No. The problem is we know that any relief you get from that substance will end up causing you more pain in the end. The way habits. It's like a loan with interest. That's what drugs and alcohol are. Any pleasure you experience with drugs and alcohol, you will have to pay back in pain with interest. That's how it works. And so I always go to the brain disease. And part of the reason why we call it a brain disease is because it literally causes physical damage to your brain. And you're unable to cope, and you're unable to think in the same way. And recovering from that takes a long time. That would be like, I share with you that I compound fractured my femur, right? That would be like if I tried to run on a broken leg after 1 month. What would happen? I would re-break my leg. It takes time for people to heal, and it takes a lot of effort, it takes a lot of intervention, and that's part of the problem is access to resources to get well. But a big part of the reason why I come into schools is to try and get ahead of that. Because you don't need to know anything about treatment if you're not addicted to drugs or alcohol. Yep, you got it. Trying to give you as much as I could there and whatever works for you, right? Okay, good. Go ahead. Yes. Yeah, it's a very straightforward question. The question was, do I still struggle with urges? Yes. So generally speaking, it's not that hard for me to stay sober on a daily basis today, but that's because of my choices. Because of the lifestyle I live, it's because I've been sober for 12 years, but that doesn't mean that I never get an urge to use, right? Because, I talk about, I went to a Yankee game earlier this year, and I walked through the parking lot. I don't make it 3 steps. I'm with my dad. I don't make it 3 steps. I smell marijuana. I see people vaping, people smoking, tailgating, drinking alcohol. It's like I'm just trying to go watch a baseball game, and I can't walk 3 steps without being exposed to nicotine, marijuana, and alcohol right in my face. And so what's the answer? Never go out? That can't be the answer. And so unfortunately, I have to learn how to deal with it. And with alcohol, it's not so much triggering for me. Alcohol was never really my thing. Reason I don't drink is it always led me back to drugs. Like, alcohol is more just annoying when you're sober and you're around somebody who's drunk. Like, right, you find out what it feels like to be the smartest person in the room when you're sober and everybody else is drunk. But for marijuana, like, there'll be some days where, like, I'll be walking and I'll smell it, don't think nothing of it. And then some days I'll smell it and I'll be like, that smells good. That's my thought. Self-talk helps, though. Having an urge, having an uncomfortable feeling, it's only temporary. Distract yourself until it goes away. Call somebody, go on a walk, go to the gym, listen to music, read, write. Do whatever you have to do until it goes away, because those urges are temporary. They don't stay all the time. And at the very beginning, it was much harder. Today, it's a lot more manageable. But yes, I do still get them from time to time. How much money did I spend on drugs? So I don't have a number for you, but I'll explain how this is financially devastating in 3 ways. Number 1 is more of your question, right? The amount of money it costs to maintain an addiction and the things people have to do to get that money. Number 2 is what we call opportunity costs. So that's lost opportunity. So during the time, let's just say during my 10 years of using drugs every day, instead of doing that, if I was getting an education or working a job, I could have been making money instead of just losing it, right? So that's number 2. And number 3 is the cost to get well. Addiction doesn't discriminate, but treatment does. And everyone needs to understand that not everyone has the same access to resources to get well. Sometimes it depends on what type of insurance you have. It depends on where you are, your geographical location. All that stuff really matters. So it's financially devastating in numerous ways. Go ahead.
Hi, I'm a mental health specialist here, so
Nice to meet you.
nice to meet you. Thank you for sharing. Question. This might be kind of difficult. What are some fun facts in your experience, maybe not personal experience, things that you've learned that you can share regarding vaping?
Sure. So vaping was introduced to me as, this is a little bit controversial. I'm going to explain why it's looked at a little bit differently in treatment centers versus the general public. So vaping was introduced to me as a not as harmful alternative to help me quit smoking cigarettes in September or October of 2012. That's when it was introduced to and it was introduced to me in treatment. And the idea was that, all right, if people are coming off of drugs like opioids and cocaine and alcohol and marijuana, we'll at least allow them to use nicotine, right? And so that's what it was introduced to me as a not as harmful alternative to help me quit smoking cigarettes, and then I can quit vaping at any time. Not the way it went at all. I became way more addicted to nicotine in treatment than I ever was when I was actively using other drugs and alcohol. Nicotine through vaping was one of the first drugs I ever tried. That was when there was just cigarettes around, but it was the last one to go. I did vape and smoke cigarettes in my first 2 years in recovery because it was that hard to quit nicotine, right? And so I think part of it too is just the ease of access, right? Like it was very inconvenient to use a cigarette. It's very convenient to use a vape. And first of all, you don't know what's in there anymore because it can be laced with all different types of stuffs. Sometimes it's THC, sometimes nicotine, sometimes other substances fall into there as well. Some people who get them, who use vapes, they end up with popcorn lung, where like they have a lot of problems with their lungs. Some of the other things that I've just learned about is just in nicotine in general, why it's so hard to quit. It's just the way that it reacts in our brains. There is an episode, so if anyone ever listens to podcasts, his name is Dr. Andrew Huberman. It's called the Huberman Lab Podcast. He does an episode on just nicotine. He's one of those doctors that can actually explain things in terms that somebody can actually understand. So he does a very good job of it. Doctors always do that, where you have no idea what they're saying. So he does a very good job of this and explains like why it is that it's so hard to quit nicotine in the first place, just the way that it reacts in our brain receptors and why we crave it so much. It's a really difficult thing for people to quit. And the ease of access, don't underestimate the marketing abilities of these companies. I mean, it's already, the damage to me is already done. It's with how many people use them today, it's truly insane. Go ahead.
If you could go back to the time you were 14 years old before you started using drugs, what would you say to yourself?
Do not underestimate the power of drugs and alcohol. Don't do it. That's what I did. Because you see, I went to that first party and my entire perception of drugs and alcohol changed dramatically. Like we had this program called DARE in school, and it was kind of like over the top, scared straight, but like we had like some programs about it, and like I knew, like my parents had talked to me about it, I knew that like I shouldn't be drinking alcohol or using drugs at a young age, right? Like I really shouldn't be doing it ever, but especially like with alcohol at a young age, and like I knew it was wrong, but then I went to that first party, and I see some of the people I look up to doing it. I see some athletes doing it. I see a couple of people I knew that like did well in school, and so my whole perception changed that night. And so I thought, I'll just do it the way they're doing it. I'll just do it at parties every once in a while. I'll never do too much. Like I thought I could control it that way. And that was the biggest mistake I made, is do not underestimate the power of drugs and alcohol. I mean, it is amazing to me how many high school students will come up to me afterwards and talk about how they'll never try hard drugs, but they're like, yeah, but I smoke marijuana every once in a while, but I can control it. They just kind of like skip over it. And I'm like, whoa. What do you mean? And that's what people do, is they underestimate the power of it. They think, kind of going back to the first question about heroin, right? You don't start there. That's not where it starts. That's where it ends, but that's not where it starts. It started at that first party. Now, will everyone go there? No. There are 5 levels of consequences if you pick up a drug or alcohol. Level 1 is minor, right? An example could be maybe you had a couple too many beers one night, you're hungover the next morning, you don't feel so good, day or two, you're fine. That's an example of a minor consequence. Level 2 is pretty serious. Now you're starting to experience them, right? Like that was when I was failing classes and now I don't play sports. Behavior starting to change, right? That's like a pretty serious consequence. Level 3 is major. That's where I was, full-blown addicted to opioids, getting convicted of felonies. Level 4, and unfortunately I have some friends who have made it to this level, that's where you cause so much damage to your brain and your body prescribe opioid painkillers, like what would I do? So only in a very extreme circumstance would I actually take an opioid painkiller. It happened one time. So I had to have like major back surgery, and I told the doctor I was in recovery from opioids, and he said, no, I'm grateful you told me, but this is a major surgery. We have to give you anesthesia in the hospital, and then when you come out of the surgery, we are going to give you some opioids, via IV. And he said, if we don't give you anything, you're going to be in so much pain that your body's not going to heal right, and then you're going to have even more problems. So we have to give you something. And then said he would send me home with a 2-day supply of like a very low dose, and I gave the pill bottle to my mother. And I took it for the first day as prescribed. It's a very low dose. I was in pain. Second day, I couldn't tell if I was convincing myself that I needed it or if I actually needed it. At that point, I had gotten rid of it. My mom brought it to the police station. There's like these drop boxes at health departments, police stations, pharmacies, and got rid of it. And it messed with me. It did. Did I go back out using again? No, I did not. But I have some friends who have taken the same precautions in a medical situation, and it has sent them back out. Because our brains don't know the difference of whether or not this is prescribed by a doctor or if it's bought on the corner by a drug dealer. So I just have to be very careful about it. Like to give you like another example of how insane addiction is. So I had a root canal once in recovery. I had an infected tooth. They had to do a root canal. It's pretty painful. But it wasn't so painful that I think I needed opioids. So the procedure ends, and the doctor comes in, and he's like, so I called you in a prescription of Vicodin to your pharmacy. I'm like, okay, I didn't even ask for it. He just went ahead and did it. And everything's done electronically today for opioids, right? So I leave there, and I could just not pick it up. Like, you don't have to go pick up your prescription, right? I leave there, and my brain is just going. I know it's there. I know I can just go pick it up legally. And so I called my girlfriend, who's now my wife at the time, and I said to her, I was like, can you go to the pharmacy and pick up my prescription and then just throw it out in the drop box in the pharmacy? And she was like, why wouldn't you just not pick it? Why would I do that? Why don't you just don't get it? And she was like, wait a second. Are you saying that because you know it's there, that you don't even want the option of going to get it, and that's why you're telling me to go pick it up and throw it out? I said, yes. That's exactly what that is. And she was just like mind blown by like that. Like she's like, that's really what it like. That's what it's like. I was like, yeah, that's it. Because if I sit there for long enough and I'm having a bad day and I know it's there, like, do I think I would have gone and got it? No, I don't. But I don't even want the opportunity. So she was like, yeah. She was like, they looked at me pretty strange because I literally picked up the prescription and then threw it in the garbage, like right there, like right in the drop box. But that's it. That's like, again, going back to your question before, that's like a really good example of like, even at 5 years sober, 6 years sober, I can still have that in my brain because we created this pathway that's there for life. That's why we call it recovery and not recovered. If it was recovered, you don't have to think about it anymore. Recovery means it's ongoing. Any other questions? Go ahead.
So your first biggest regret was taking drugs, but what was your second biggest regret?
Not listening to the treatment providers that were trying to tell me I needed extended care. So I would go away for 28 days, and they would tell me it's not enough time. 28 days, not enough time. You need long-term treatment. And I didn't want to hear it. I wanted to get back. I wanted to start using again, and I needed more time for my brain and my body to heal. So I suffered a lot more pain. They wanted me to go to extended care at 18 years old. I didn't get sober until I was 24 or 25 years old. So had I gone away for a longer period of time, I could have avoided a lot of harm and started this life sooner. That would be my second one. Anybody else? A lot of good questions here. Okay, so what I'll do is I'm going to hang back afterwards. If anyone anyone is too shy to ask a question, that's part of the reason why this is up here. At Speak Sobriety is all my social media. Instagram is usually the easiest way to get a hold of me. I do respond to student questions. Sometimes it takes me a day or two because I get a lot of them, but if you want to message me, I will post something later today